Getting passed out, I'll just remind you this week we're looking at 1 Samuel chapters 6 and 7. Last week we studied about, in part, the capture of the ark, and this week, of course, we'll be studying about the return of the ark. Actually, not going to do much reading, like I've told you before. We got 2 chapters. If I try to read, I don't finish. So I hope you can read these on your own, and hopefully if you haven't read them, maybe some of these stories are pretty familiar. Maybe it'll ring some bells as we go along here. So question number 1 on your handout is, do you think chance thinking or cause and effect thinking is more prevalent in our society today?
I'd say cause and effect.
Okay, you think cause and effect? Would anybody disagree with that?
I think it depends on what kind of thinking you're talking about. I think chance thinking, in that everybody's like, there's a chance it'll go bad, but I'm going to try it because there's a chance it'll go good too.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of that, if that's the kind of thinking you mean is as far as behavior.
Yeah, well, I think what I was thinking about is why things happen. You know, a lot of people, some people have the philosophy today that, there's not really any reasoning behind why things happen, right? Just luck.
Bad luck.
Yeah, bad luck, dumb luck, chance, we might say, that something happened to us. How should a godly person think?
Well, it's both.
Okay.
Right? Because some stuff is cause and effect. I go stab somebody, there's going to be an effect. I'm going to go to jail.
Okay.
Right? But some stuff, it can just be, it just happens. Bad stuff can happen to good people.
Okay. So, you think probably a little bit of both? You think one's more prevalent than the other?
In our country, you're asking?
Yeah, just in our society.
Don't you think chance thinking is about every denomination there is?
Could be. I don't know exactly what they're thinking, but it very, very well could be. Yes, sir?
I think pretty much anything that happens has an effect from it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt. And, when you think about a Christian, we go through life believing God has a plan for us, don't we? And so the things that happen within our lives happen for a reason. Adam brought up the idea of bad things, and bad things do happen to good people. That's just a reality of it. But I even think about Job. Was there a reason why bad things happened to him? Yeah, it wasn't just random, was it? It was actually Satan trying to attack him, wasn't it? So I bring that up because tonight when we're going to study the Philistines and the return of the ark. And we remember last week we studied about some of the bad things that happened to these people. And they didn't really, it kind of came down to the conclusion that Jehovah God brought these things upon us, but they didn't really want to think that way either, did they? They did some things to try to say, well, is this really just chance? This is some dumb luck that all these things happen wherever the ark went? Or is there something to this? Is there a reason behind it? So that's what we're going to study about tonight. So question number 2 on our handout. We mentioned last week, read about chapter 5, the ark of God got captured by the Philistines. And how long does the ark remain with the Philistines? Yeah, 7 months. And during that 7 months, how many major cities did it go to? Does anybody remember?
3 or 4. There's 5 lords, but I think it named 3 cities, right?
Yeah, there's at least, that we read about, there's at least 3 major cities where in the nation of Philistia where the ark goes to. Now, it is kind of interesting, and some people think, because whenever the offering is sent back with the ark to Israel, does anybody remember how many mice and how many tumors they send back? 5, right? So some people believe that maybe it went to all 5 of these major cities before it ever returned back to Israel. But if it did only go to 3 cities, how long does that leave it in each city? Approximately. Yeah, a little over 2 months. And so can you imagine having that thing in your city and the things that happen during or in your city for 2 months before you moved it and before it went away? A lot of times I think, and maybe this is where the Philistines are, and we're like this sometimes in life. Sometimes I think it's easier to know what needs to be done than how to do it. Does that make sense? Sometimes you know something needs to be done, but you don't always know, well, how's the best way to go about doing that? And sometimes because we don't know the best how, we kind of drag our feet on what really needs to be done. I think the Philistines knew a long time ago the ark needed to go, don't you? But one of the questions that they had was, how are we going to send it back? So what we read about is they come up with this plan by which they're going to return the ark back to Israel. Now, let me ask you this question. Why didn't they just take the ark and go back to Israel and knock on their door and say, hey, here's your ark back?
They try to do it in a way that saves face.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of pride involved here, don't you? I don't think that, they wanted to come face to face with Israel and say, hey, take this thing back. We don't want it anymore, I don't think they wanted to have to apologize either for taking it.
Well, and it seems like they were trying to find a way, maybe not even so much save face, but how can we return it in a way that's going to appease the God who is wrecking our cities?
Yeah.
Because they're aware that God has power because they're suffering under his hand. And so just saying, here's your ark back, isn't going to say I'm sorry. So
yeah, but I would also say this, what better way to learn how to appease the God than to ask the people who worship him? I mean, that wouldn't have been a bad idea either, right? But I think there's probably a lot of pride involved here. They didn't want to go back face to face to Israel and say, we don't want this thing anymore. Do you think Israel knew what was happening?
You mean as far as retaliation of them?
Yeah, do you think they know or knew what had been going on these last 7 months in the land of Philistia?
That wouldn't have been a secret.
No, there's no way. And generally, these people are, kind of the overlords of Israel, right? They were basically under their thumb. They were oppressing them. And so they had to have known, these things that were going on. So probably contributed a little bit to this plan that the Philistines came up with to return the ark. So they decide they're going to return the ark. They kind of go to all the magicians, the diviners, all the chief people of that day and age. We've talked about that before. People in positions of power and influence and authority and giving advice to hires up. They go to them and they ask, how should we do this? And so part of what these chief people say is, if you're going to send the ark of Jehovah back to Israel, what do you got to send along with it? Okay, there's a couple ways. There's some things that we read about here, but they described it as a trespass offering. What does that mean to you? When you hear trespass offering, what do you think of?
Sin offering, blood sacrifice. That's what I think of.
Yeah, a sin offering. And it's the idea of trying to appease or to pacify the God of Israel. So that's what they're concerned about here. When you send this ark back, don't just send it back. You send it back with something that's going to appease the God of Israel, something that's going to pacify his anger, something that's going to stay his hand from all these difficult things that we've been experiencing. And so what are some areas, when you read about the Philistines here, what are some areas when it comes to a trespass offering where maybe they had a little bit of clue about what they were doing, and then what are some areas in which they had no idea? Let's start with the areas in which they might have known a little bit. What were they going to send back? What did they come up with?
Gold and tumors and rats.
Okay, well, specifically the material, right, is gold. So why would they send gold? Okay?
It's the most precious.
It's the most valuable, right? What's more valuable than gold? In the eyes of a pagan, this is the most valuable thing that you own, that you have. And so I think what they did understand is if they were going to pacify the wrath and the anger of Israel's God, they were going to have to give him something that's valuable. You know, they were going to have to give him something that was worth, something that was costly to them. Okay, so I think that's a positive on their part, but what are the negatives? Does the God of Israel want gold? You know, is that what he's looking for? And if you're trying to appease the wrath of the God of Israel, if you're trying to pacify the wrath of the God of Israel, what does it take? Blood sacrifice, right? Something more precious than gold. Something more valuable, it takes blood. You know, the Bible talks about in several places, Hebrews 9:22, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. There had to be a blood sacrifice. We read in the book of Colossians, in Colossians chapter 1 and verse 20, that it was through the blood of Christ that Christ, through his blood, made peace with God on our behalf. So if you want to have peace with God, if you want to pacify the wrath and the anger of God for a trespass that you committed, it takes something very costly. And the Bible teaches us it takes blood, and not, could the blood of animals do it? The blood of bulls and goats? No, it was a figure, it was a shadow of what?
Right.
The most precious blood to ever pump through the veins of anybody here that's ever lived upon this earth. A sinless human being. And that was Jesus Christ. And so, you know, you think about this idea, the Philistines knew that they needed to give something valuable, something costly, but even by their standards, what they gave God, it wasn't enough. It was too low of a cost. So they decide not only are they not going to send this ark back empty-handed, but they're also they came up with a test, right? And why did they come up with a test? What was their thinking behind that? Why didn't they just return it back to Israel?
They were unsure.
Okay, they were unsure about whether this was the hand of God, right? The hand of Jehovah, all these things that had happened to them, or maybe it was just what? Chance, right? Bad luck, dumb luck, something like that. So they come up with a test to determine why all these things happen. And what was their test? There's really two very important things about this test, I think, that show the fact that it was from God. Name one of them.
They were using kind that had not been ever yoked, so they had no training in the cart.
Okay, so they decide we're gonna take two cows, right, and we're gonna yoke them together. They made this new cart. They set the ark of the Lord on this new cart. We're going to yoke these two cows together. Never been in a harness before. Never been yoked before. And we're going to have them return the Ark of the Covenant. Now, if the Ark of the Covenant had made it, that in and of itself would have been a miracle, right? Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, can you imagine taking two animals that have never been yoked and never been yoked together before and expect them to be able to perform flawlessly? But yet that's what they did. What was the second part?
They took their calves away from them.
Okay, these two cows had calves that they were nursing, right? And they take the calves away from them and they pin them up. Well, what's a cow's natural reaction if you take their calf away? Yeah, they're going to do everything they can within their power to reach that calf, aren't they? So it would have been completely opposite to every physical thing that man knows for these two cows to return this ark and for them to even go in the first place. But if they did go, to even cooperate together and be able to pull this cart in a straight line and get it to the Israelites. And so they did all that because, again, they still had some doubts. You know, maybe it's just chance. Maybe this is just dumb luck that all these things happen to us. So what happens is, the Bible says these two cows go right straight down the road, and their calves are back there bawling, and the cows are bawling back, and they just keep on going toward Israel. And so that was a surefire sign to the Philistines that this was from the hand of God. So the ark comes back to Israel, comes back. Question number 5 here. What action did the Israelites take to acknowledge God's hand in this return of the ark? First of all, where did it go to? What city did it go to? You remember? Yeah, Beth Shemesh. And do you know what's special about Beth Shemesh? Anybody know? Did you do any studying? Stir up some memories, maybe? Do what? Okay, that's where one of the guys' fields was, yeah. You know what kind of city it was? Well, according to Joshua 21, it was a Levitical city. And specifically, remember the Levitical cities was divided up among the 3 major descendants. You had Kohath, you had Merari, and is it Gishon? Is that the third one? Okay, don't quote me on that, but I think that's the order that they go. And this particular city belonged to the descendants of Kohath. Do you remember? I know it's been forever since we studied the tabernacle, but do you remember what the job of the sons of Kohath was? To keep the articles of the temple. So God literally sends it to a place where people should know what to do with it, right? These are the experts. These are the guys who have been trained. These are the guys who God put in charge to take care of situations like this. And so part of their responsibility was whenever the tabernacle was moved, they were responsible for covering all these articles before they were moved, and then uncovering whenever they were set up. So when it arrives, right there on the spot, they take the cart, they chop it up, they use the wood from it to build a fire, they offer burnt offerings to God. And can you see anything weird about this burnt offering that they offered up to God? You remember some of the specifications for a burnt offering?
The priest should do it.
Well, no, yeah, the priests were supposed to be the ones who did it, but specifically it was supposed to be male, right? We know that's not what these are because bulls don't have calves. We'll just put it that way, right? So we know that was kind of, but maybe you can understand the situation. They want to do something to honor God. So they did this. The Bible also says they offered a lot of other sacrifices, not just these burnt offerings, but there were other sacrifices that they offered up along with it. But they did something that they shouldn't have done. What they did?
Made an offering for the Philistine gods too.
Okay. What else?
They looked into the ark.
Yeah, that's the big no-no, right? They looked into the ark. Should these guys have known better? These weren't just farmers out here, who didn't have any idea about anything, didn't know anything about worshiping God. These were men who were trained to handle this in the appropriate manner. And so when you read about what happens, some people say, why did God react so violently? It's because these people knew that. I mean, when you know better and you go ahead and you do it anyway, does God just kind of turn an eye at that? Does he say, no big deal? No, that's when you get the attention of God, right? When you defiantly do something, when you open-handedly do something. And so they did something that they knew by the law, what was the punishment? It was death. If somebody looked inside the ark, they were going to die. And so you read about God inflicting some punishment upon these people. Some of them died. To me, that's kind of shocking. Because they start out so good. They do all these things to, show their appreciation and to honor God. I don't know. I mean, why do you think they did it? Why would we do it? Maybe I should ask it in that way.
Well, they had careful with those stuff, and I guess they just make sure they do put more in the ark, maybe.
Okay, maybe they were genuine. Steve's going to give them the shadow of the doubt here. Maybe they were sincere and they wanted to make sure everything was there.
People would never see it. They're curious. They just want to see
Who gets to look in the ark?
Nobody.
I mean, how many times have you ever been in the presence of the ark? How many times have you ever had the opportunity to look inside of it? So here they are. They're out here in the middle of nowhere. This is their city. The ark has come to them. Is there going to be a better opportunity? I mean, if you're ever going to look in the ark, this would seem like it would be the best situation, right?
Well, and if we're running with a shadow, a bit of shadow of the benefit of the doubt, I mean, their enemies just brought this back. And the ark's supposed to be covered when it's transported anyway, so there's the damage is done, it's out in the open, we're all looking at it. And then, what if it's not the real ark? I mean, it's not like enemies have never brought something that wasn't what it appeared to be into other people's areas before. So, I mean, they should not have looked at it. They know better, but at the same time, it's out in the open. It's not covered. Is it even the real ark? Why is God letting this happen?
Yeah. So here's probably the better question to ask. What should they have done? Covered it up. That was their job, right? They knew whenever the ark was moved out in the public, it was supposed to be covered. So whenever it came to them, they should have covered it up and then, figured out, well, what are we going to do with this? But again, they didn't do that. Did they know better? I think they did because of their lineage, because of the training. And so I think that's why God is so severe in his dealing with them. So let's see here. Let's do the second part here. Question number 6. Why was the ark sent on from Bethshemesh? All right, that's where it came, but it got moved. Why did it get moved? Okay. Hey, did anybody have a different version that gives a different number?
Some take a 0 out of that, don't they?
Yeah. So if you did a little bit of studying, there's a little bit of manuscript variance there in the number. And that's one of those areas, whenever I just mention them from time to time, that's one of those areas where you're probably looking at a copyist error, from one manuscript to the other one. Or you might be looking at somebody inserting scribal notes from the margin or something like that. And there's a few things like that in the Bible, numbers that vary from manuscript to manuscript. And again, I always mention, is this going to cost you your soul? No. I mean, it's something very, very minute. Now, do some studying on your own. I'm not going to get in it too deeply, but it is just kind of interesting when you go to those places to make note of that and do a little research and study and figure it out for yourself.
Glad we don't have a time frame of how long it stayed in this city either, do we?
I don't know. I don't remember a specific number. Did anybody see one there?
25 years.
Well, it goes to, the next place it goes to, it stays for 20 years. We know that for sure. But yeah, as far as how long it's here, I don't know if there's an exact number in there or not.
The way it reads, it didn't take God long.
Yeah.
To pay their error, so.
And think about it from this way too. I mean, it had just come from the Philistines and they had all these things happen to them, right? Now it gets into your country, now people start dying. So you think there's a little bit of already some built up fear from hearing all these stories before? I would say there probably was. So they didn't want it anymore, did they? They wanted to get rid of it. So in chapter 7, we read a little bit about Samuel here. And the ark comes back into the borders of Israel. What's the mood here in chapter 7 and verse 2? What are the Israelites like?
Repentance.
Okay, it's a time of mourning, right? And what we learned there in verse, let me get it right here so I don't misquote it. Verse 2, same verse there. The ark remained in Kirjath-jearim a long time. It was there 20 years. and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. So we're talking about 20 years later. Okay? Sometimes we read these things from chapter to chapter and we think, well, it's the next day. But this is 20 years later. This is the time of who? Of what? Who's leading Israel? Samuel. Judges, right? They're still in the time of Judges. We haven't got to the kings yet. Samuel is considered a judge. He's described as such in several different places. What were the people, God's people, like during the days of the Judges? Ungodly, but they would get severely oppressed, and then they'd start turning back to God. They'd say, we want to start serving God. We're tired of all this. We don't want to be servants anymore. We don't want to be oppressed anymore. We want to go back to what God said or told us to do, and we want to prosper. And that's one of these times that we're reading about here. So they're mourning for the fact that, and here's another question. When the ark came back to Israel, why didn't they just take it back to Shiloh? Why did it go to Kirjath-Jearim?
Didn't they destroy it?
That's the implication, or indication, I think, don't you? Now, we read about the destruction of Shiloh in the Scripture. I mentioned last week in the book of Psalms and the book of Jeremiah. But exactly when and where it took place, we don't know for sure. But it makes sense that if Shiloh was still there and the tabernacle was still there, why didn't they just take the ark back to Shiloh? Why didn't they just put it back in the tabernacle? Well, it has to be because it's not there. It has to be because it's been destroyed. And so it remains there in Kirjath-Jearim for about 20 years. So the cycle of the judges, they're seeking after the Lord. They're ready to go back to God. Samuel says, if you go back to God with all your heart, then God will deliver you from the hands of your enemies. What does that mean? How did he define returning to God with all your heart? Yeah, get rid of those foreign gods and worship Jehovah alone. Now think about this. Samuel has been preaching this for 20 years. That's what he's been trying to get Israel to do, right? So now they're finally ready to do it. And so they assemble at Mizpah. What was the purpose of the assembly there at Mizpah? What were they accomplishing?
Samuel was sacrificing and praying to God for forgiveness of their sins.
Yeah, it seems like it's some kind of public ceremony, doesn't it? And that ceremony was basically aimed at these people acknowledging the fact that they've done wrong, that they've broken God's law, acknowledging the fact that they were going to be committed to God, they were going to put away their gods, and praying for God's help. And as they're waiting there in Mizpah, going through this public ceremony, what happens? Yeah, so the Philistines hear about this big Israelite gathering, right? And probably in their minds, they're thinking, they think they're going to rebel. They think they're going to revolt against us, so we're going to go down there and squash this, and we're going to put an end to it. Can you imagine the children of Israel when they heard the Philistines were coming to attack them? I mean, these guys, were they ready to fight? I mean, they'd come to worship. Could you imagine, coming to worship God, and all of a sudden, here comes an army marching against you to fight? I'd say, man, I left all my arsenal at home. Need to go back home and stock up. So they weren't ready to fight in any way. And when they realize that they're going to be attacked, what's Samuel doing?
Sacrificing.
Okay, sacrificing, and what else? Praying. And what did they tell Samuel when they learned what was happening? They tell him, don't stop praying for us. Don't quit what you're doing here. Do you see how they turn? Their greatest weapon now is not the sword or the spear or something that they own. Their greatest weapon is God. And they know that as long as Samuel is praying to God, that gives them hope to overcome their enemy. So what miraculous circumstances God used to defeat the enemy?
Thunder.
Yeah, a thunderstorm. Anybody ever been in a severe thunderstorm before? I'm talking like out in the open. I used to do a lot of fishing on the creek, and we would float sometimes, 5 to 10 mile floats. There'd been a time or two that I got stuck in a severe thunderstorm. I remember one time, in fact, Dad, I can remember him when we went. It started hailing, and it was so big, we actually had to pull the boat up to the bank and get under the boat. I mean, even under the trees, you couldn't have shelter from it. But I'm talking about a severe thunderstorm. Could that split the army up and send them in all different directions and cause a lot of confusion? Yeah, it could have done a tremendous amount of that. And so they set up a stone. What'd they name the stone? Question 13. What'd they call it? Ebenezer stone, right? We sang about that in our first song we sang tonight. What does that mean?
Stone of memory.
Stone of memory, and the memory was when they prayed to God and God helped or God delivered them, right? And that's the idea behind the song. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come. The idea of praying to God, God has helped us, we raise up the Ebenezer stone. So after they defeat Israel here, what's Israel's relation like to the Philistines for the next few years?
They were powerless. The Philistines were powerless over them.
Yeah, so they didn't ravage Israel anymore. They restored the territory that had been taken. And not only were they, in favor with the Philistines, but a lot of the other surrounding nations heard about this. And because of that, they established treaties and make peace with the Israelites because of it. So, all right, we're out of time. Does anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions before we end tonight?